This episode of Talk Your Book is proudly brought to you by Honan, providing a complete range of insurance, risk and financial solutions.
Fundies called me up, told me to take a look, but stay stubborn as bulls and talk their own book. Get the money, get the money, get the money.
Hi, I'm Chris Judd and this is Talk Your Book, and today we're joined by Joseph Constable from Hancock and Gore. Joseph, thanks very much for making your Talk Your Book debut.
Pleasure, Chris. Thanks for having me.
And what stock did you want to talk about today, Joseph?
I'd like to talk about Po Valley Energy, ASX PVE, which is a natural gas producer in Italy.
And when we talk about Hancock and Gore, are you a natural buyer of resource companies or are you a generalist fund that invests across all asset classes?
Yeah, we're a generalist fund, so we're actually a listed company ourselves. HNG is the ticker, and we invest in a range of companies, both private and ASX listed, in all sectors. And I also run a fund called the HNG High Conviction Fund, ticker HCF, which is a listed investment company focused on ASX listed microcaps, but not a specific bet on resources, but really looking for value and where other institutions aren't looking.
And we'll get into Po Valley in a minute, but I noted that you're actually on the Po Valley board as well. Is that an unusual situation for you where you jump on board in an investment company, or is that something that you guys do quite regularly?
Yeah, that's part of what I'd probably call our value add, is that we do really like to be active investors, and really it's a very concentrated portfolio for us. It's about 10 core holdings, so we know them really well. We like to be invested for five years plus, and sometimes that does involve joining the boards and being part of rolling out a certain strategy. So that's something that we really do enjoy doing and engaging with.
And Po Valley's a small company. There'd be plenty of investors that haven't heard of it. Give us the 10,000 foot view of Po Valley and what they're up to.
Yeah, Po Valley has actually been listed for some time. In the 2000s, late 2000s, it acquired a portfolio of natural gas assets in Italy, and it acquired them post the liberalisation of gas by the EU, which happened in the early 2000s, and it's slowly developed those over time. And these were all assets owned by the oil and gas giant Eni, which was formerly a government company. And so it's slowly produced from these assets and spun them out. And it's got a few final core assets, which are actually the biggest and most prospective gas fields, which are ready for production. And the first one should come on of those early next year.
And Europe's energy crisis has been well documented. There's only two viable options to solve an energy crisis, is to increase domestic production or to be able to buy the commodities in your own currency, which Italy obviously doesn't have the ability to do. Have you seen a real push over in Italy to change the way they view domestic gas and oil production, given what's happened in Russia this year?
Yeah, it's really interesting, and I've followed it obviously very closely, and it's been an enormous change. And it actually really started to take place in February 2021, and that was when a new government came in with Mario Draghi as head, and they really started accelerating approvals. So we'd been waiting on approvals for some years for our assets, and as soon as they came in, they were very forthcoming, and we got our environmental approval, and gas prices actually started going up, and this is before the Ukraine war, slowly in early 2021, and this was when there was this tension about Nord Stream 2 coming on in Russia, from Russia to Europe, and so as that started to happen, the government became a lot more focused on this domestic production. But it was only recently, and I say really in the last few weeks, since the new government's formed, and this is Meloni as Prime Minister, they've actually really come out and said, we want to double national production, and we want to start focusing more on the Adriatic, some offshore assets to get production up there. And Po Valley actually has a big asset in the Adriatic. So that is a massive change, and it shows that, yeah, as you said, they can't really buy gas necessarily in their own currency, but shoring up domestic production is crucial when they had historically been reliant on Russia for 40% of their gas. and gas actually accounts for more than half of their energy production. So it's been a big change in the operating environment, and of course it's very positive for us.
And whilst Italy is very much a first world country, it probably doesn't have the best reputation in terms of, for businesses dealing with their governance systems over there. Is it a case now where the energy crisis is so significant that it overwhelms perhaps some challenges businesses have had in the past dealing with government and governance structures in Italy?
I think that's the case, and specifically can talk about what the environment's been like for a gas company like us. And it hasn't been easy, and you can just look back at Her Valley's performance over the last 5 years or so. And between June 2018 and Feb 2021, when there was the five-star movement was in power, they were very much put a freeze on new business, and we had, say, environmental approvals forthcoming, but they just didn't go anywhere. And of course, very frustrating for PV and for shareholders. But really a big change, not just, as I said, really from Feb 2021, we saw a big change because of that government and Mario Draghi, the former president of the European Central Bank, clearly very much more business oriented and business friendly. And that spirit has really remained with the new government. But of course, being in an energy crisis has really pushed that along quite a bit. So there's, working in a completely new gear where things historically might have been quite slow and difficult. To put it into context, we were waiting for those approvals for nearly 3 years. And then when this new government came in Feb 2021, about 2 months later, we received the approvals. We received our final production concession just a few months ago, and things are really moving, and it's a very big change.
And so let's maybe dig into the Potamer well. It's upcoming. It feels like a good place to start. It sounds like you've got full production approval and hopefully ready to produce first gas in the first half of next calendar year. Is that right?
Yeah, that's exactly right. So the Potamer well is part of the Selva onshore gas field, and that's near Bologna. And that was drilled in January of 2018. It was very, very successful drill and really good flow rates. Got up to north of 100,000 cubic meters per day in that. So the company was really happy with it. And so these are proven and probable reserves. The actual field has been produced in the past under E&I. So this is our really near-term focus, is to get that into production in the first half of next year. So we got the final production concession and permit just a few months ago. So we're in the process now of building a pipeline and getting a gas plant manufactured, and we're fully funded for it all as well. We own 63% of the field. We have a great JV partner in the UK. It's a listed company called Prospex Energy. And so to put it into context, the size of Selva, it's 380 odd million cubic meters. It got valued independently by an expert about, say, 6 months ago at 50 million Australian dollars. That's our share. And that's just the proven and probable reserves that's been drilled. And there's pretty good line of sight to double that based on our contingent resources. And it's very similar geology. So the independent expert said there's a high chance of success. And so that's the immediate focus for us, is to bring Selva into production, get that cash flow coming in early next year.
And over a 12-month period at current gas prices, what sort of revenue can you see that bringing in?
Yeah, so we would think that in a year you could be, at a steady state, should be producing something like 35 million cubic meters of gas. And at current gas prices, that's about, and that this is at the contracted futures price for 2023, that's about 70 million Australian dollars in revenue. So our share of that's $44 million. And we're talking about pretty high EBITDA margins, north of 90%. So it's extremely profitable, and there should be some very decent free cash flows coming to the company. And that's obviously a very, very exciting prospect.
And for a company the size of Po Valley, I mean, their market cap's sort of $50 to $60 million, is that right?
That's right. Yeah, currently about 60 million. So clearly we see great opportunity and great upside. I think the market is we're far away from the action probably in Australia, and we're starting to see with our own gas issues. There's probably a bit more focus on even what's happening in Europe. But to put it into context, our joint venture partner has a much higher valuation on the London Stock Exchange, and so I think there's a lot more focus probably in Europe. But I'd imagine once the cash is coming in, things might change here, or people will look at us in a different way, rather than just being a developer who's hasn't been able to convert it into cash. The other thing I'd mention is we 75 to 80%, let's say, of the shareholder register is held by just 5 or 6 key long-term shareholders. So and we're one of them. We're very much, and I'm talking now as a shareholder, probably rather than director, but we're looking forward to a return, and I think that's what's keeping the shareholder group pretty excited is getting that cash finally coming in.
And talk to me about the distance to the grid of the Potamer well.
Yeah, very close. It's about 1 kilometre from the grid, so it's very, very straightforward. It's a simple connection into the grid that's operated by the partially government-owned enterprise called SNAM. So we obviously have the contracts with them, and we're looking into gas contract sales, and so it's a very straightforward and small footprint.
And will it just be a floating market price for the gas, or will you lock in offtake agreements? What will that look like mechanically?
Yeah, so we haven't actually disclosed that yet, and the normal situation there is actually just to be doing a floating, not fixing your prices, and that's probably most likely. But that's something that's for ongoing discussions.
And so if Potamer all goes well, there's going to be plenty of cash flow running through Po Valley. What will you use that cash flow for?
Yeah, so I think, as I said, first and foremost, we've had very long-standing shareholders who are very keen to see a return, and the board will have to decide how to use that cash. We do have some drilling that can take place in Selva, as I said, to double that the field size, but that's but once we take into account our joint venture partner, a pretty small proportion. So you think we'd be in a pretty good position for decent shareholder returns. We do also have another asset, which is an offshore field called Tierra Rico, and that's a much bigger asset than Selva. That's about 5 times larger at about 1 million cubic meters of gas. But that is something that we need to really look at how we progress, because it's as I said, much larger footprint. It's offshore off the coast of Ravenna, looking at something like 67 million euros of capex to get that into production. So that's something that we've said already. We'll look for a JV partner or an asset realization strategy. But that asset alone was valued at $88 million by this independent expert. That's net of the development costs. But again, that's probably too big for a company of our size, and something that we need to monetize. It's despite being given environmental approval in 2021, there's a lawsuit against it brought by an environmental group, and Italy's former government brought in some legislation that threw into question whether that could be produced from. But most recently, the government has said that they want to, as I say, focus on the Adriatic, which is where this asset is, and increase production from there. So once we get some clarity, we can really progress with that one, how we monetize it. So those are probably the key things. It's getting Selva into cash flow production, then looking at drilling those wells, and then monetizing our 100% holding in this very big field called Tierra Rico. Plenty of room for shareholder returns in that.
And just more broadly, perhaps, it might be a hard question to answer, but Europe was, one of the real leaders in the ESG movement, which I don't know if it made more sense in a disinflationary environment, when all of a sudden there's a high inflationary environment and we're using less dense energy sources and people are struggling to pay their bills and buy food in first world countries, let alone in third world countries. Are you seeing a change in sentiment on the ground, do you think, with the everyday person that maybe some of the speed at which we've tried to change energy sources needs to be revised?
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting point, and I do think that's the case, and you can even just see it with voting and what's happened in the most recent election in Italy, where we've probably got a bit ahead of ourselves, and I don't think that too many people would disagree that we need to think about how we can have our world working the best way possible, and renewables make a lot of sense in that way. But probably it will just happen a bit too quickly and led to a lot of underinvestment. And you're seeing this just completely impossible increase in prices, and that's really changes it. It's one thing just thinking about it theoretically, but if you're feeling that pressure in Italy and Europe, it's very different. So I think we've seen that in the way that voting's happened. We've seen that in government policy, such as I said, in Italy, talking about doubling national production, which would have really been unheard of for any of the last 10 years or so. So that is coming without too much backlash. And I think that, those changes need to happen, and people need to, and are increasingly accepting that alongside the pathway towards renewables is having a decent amount of gas in that mix, and not being beholden to other countries that you don't agree with their ethics or their way of operating, such as Russia, which happened in the past. So being master of your own destiny is much better.
Beautiful, Joseph. It's a very interesting story. I look forward to following it and see how it goes with First Gas hopefully coming on in 2023. Thanks very much for coming on.
Absolute pleasure. Thanks very much for having me. It was great to chat.
Thanks, mate.
This episode of Talk Your Book was proudly brought to you by Honan, who go beyond a transactional insurance broker to deliver better outcomes for their clients. If you're enjoying Talk Your Book, make sure you subscribe to Chris Judd Invest.